So we've got a report on the desk today that really, it just completely flips the script on what we usually consider high performance.
Oh, absolutely. It's a totally different paradigm.
Right, because usually when we do a deep dive into these personality systems, we're looking for, I don't know, the disruptors,
Hmm.
the sprinters, the people breaking things to move fast. But this document from the Max Energy ME80 personality system makes this wild argument that the most critical function in a chaotic system isn't speed at all.
It's
But
stillness.
exactly,
It's a
stillness.
super provocative stance, isn't it?
Yeah.
We're looking at the WSSU profile today, which is also known as the gentle receiver.
Or the warm receiver.
Right, the warm receiver.
Mhm.
And if you just glance at that title, you might think, okay, this is a passive personality, someone who
No.
just sits back.
Yeah, it sounds a little soft, maybe.
It does. But once you actually get into the mechanics of the ME80 report, you realize this is actually a high-power guardian archetype.
Mm-hmm.
They aren't passive at all.
Yeah.
They are actively stabilizing.
And that distinction, the difference between passive and stabilizing, is exactly what I want to unpack for you guys today. Because the report uses this specific phrase for their core identity, dissolving conflict through gentle reception.
Yeah, it's a great phrase.
It sounds almost chemical to me, like there is a neutralizing agent in this volatile solution. But before we get into the biology of it, let's establish the framework a bit. We're working with the Max Energy ME80 system. And for the uninitiated, this isn't just your standard magazine personality test. It's looking at energy processing, right?
Correct. Think of
Yeah.
the ME80 system as a schematic for the engine under your psychological hood.
Okay.
It's way less about, do you like going to loud parties?
Mhm.
And it's much more about how does your brain metabolize information and emotion?
Where do you get your fuel, basically?
Exactly. Where do you get it and how do you spend it?
Mhm.
And for the WSSU, the gentle receiver, that engine is completely designed for long-term sustainability, not these short-term bursts of speed.
Okay, so let's look at that identity and core philosophy section. The report calls them a guardian. They're not the kind standing at the gate with a spear,
I
right?
doubt it all.
It describes them more like a container. Like their core declaration is all about prioritizing the system's ability to actually last.
That is the key. Their whole philosophy of control is fascinating because it's so counterintuitive to modern business culture.
Yeah.
Most people try to control a chaotic situation by forcing it to move. We need a decision right now.
Right, right. Bias toward action.
Exactly. But the WSSU controls the situation by checking the foundation first. They do not rush to advance when sudden change hits. Their very first instinct is to pause and ask, can the people involved actually sustain this impact?
Which is such a crucial question, and it's one that completely gets skipped in corporate environments. I actually noticed the report mentions their key belief is that true strength is found in making people feel held.
Mhm.
That's a really specific choice of words, making people feel held. It implies their version of leadership is about creating a safety net so the work can continue.
Yeah, the goal isn't to stop the work, right? It's to repair the order through warmth so the work can actually continue without the whole machine just breaking down. They're looking at the bearing capacity of the team.
Curating capacity, right?
Think about it like a bridge. If you overload a bridge, it collapses. The gentle receiver is essentially the engineer who's calculating that load limit before allowing the heavy trucks to cross.
Okay, let's get under the hood then, because I want to look at the energy matrix. This is where the ME80 report gets pretty technical. It lists 3 layers, IP, IQ, and EQ. But in this system, those don't mean what they usually mean in pop psychology, do they?
No, they don't. These are activation layers.
Yeah.
They explain the sequence of how a WSSU processes the world around them.
Okay, so walk us through it.
Sure. So it starts with the IP, which is the inner value layer. For the gentle receiver, this layer operates on risk perception activation.
Risk perception? That sounds a bit intense. I mean, is this just anxiety? Or is it something more functional?
It's highly functional. It's not just blind panic. Think of it like a seismograph. It's this high sensitivity radar tuned specifically into potential instability.
Ah, okay.
So while everyone else is looking at the shiny new opportunity, the WSSU's IP layer is automatically scanning for cracks in the foundation. They aren't trying to be negative, they're just biologically wired to sense what could disrupt the harmony or safety of the group before it actually happens.
So it's a preventative scan.
Exactly.
And that feeds into the second layer, right? The IQ or emotional activation layer. The report says this relies on experience and verification judgment. To me, reading this, it sounded like they're running a background check on reality.
That is a perfect analogy.
Yeah.
Yes. When a WSSU is presented with a new idea or a sudden pivot, they don't just leap on faith. Their brain immediately initiates this massive query against their internal database. They're asking, have we seen this before? Did it work? Was it safe for everybody?
Okay, so that actually explains the slowness that other people might perceive. It's not that they're just stalling, it's data retrieval.
Okay.
They're cross-referencing the current situation with every past experience to ensure the path forward is verified.
And obviously that takes a little time, but it ensures that when they do move, they aren't walking everyone right off a cliff.
Yeah.
But the real powerhouse here, the core of it all, is the third layer, the EQ or the decision calculation layer.
Yeah, this is where the gentle receiver name really earns its keep, I think. It focuses on emotional bearing and stability. This really stood out to me as their superpower.
Oh, absolutely.
Because the report describes this as the ability to literally bear emotion. And in physics, bearing weight requires structural integrity. How does that translate psychologically?
Well, think about what happens when conflict erupts in a room. Someone starts yelling or a project fails. Most people do one of three things. They deflect it, they fight back, or they completely check out.
Fight, flight, or freeze.
Exactly. But the WSSU does something rare. They absorb it. They have this incredibly high capacity to take in chaotic, high-voltage emotional energy and simply hold it. They don't let it destabilize them. And then they calculate their next decisions based purely on what will maintain the emotional stability of the ecosystem.
Wow. And that leads right into the manifestation layer. Because the report notes that their energy flow is inward. So, to an outsider, looking at a WSSU in a meeting, it might look like they're doing nothing. But internally, they are running a heavy processing plant.
Yes, the manifestation is entirely about carrying, absorbing, and integrating. They aren't projecting their energy outward to dominate the space or talk over people. They're pulling the energy of the room in, filtering all that anxiety out, and quieting it down. It's a very yin state of power. It's receptive rather than active.
I want to connect this to the inner traits section, specifically this concept they call steady holding. The phrase they use is hold first, adjust slowly. I can imagine this drives type A personalities absolutely crazy.
Oh, it does.
But I can also see why it's so vital.
Right? It drives type A's crazy right up till the type A hits a massive crisis. And then the WSSU is the only person they want in the room.
So true.
That steady holding trait is a whole system perspective. Before changing anything, the gentle receiver assesses the bearing capacity of the people. And here's a really brilliant nuance from the report. They don't view emotional fluctuation like tears, anger, panic as interference.
Right, because usually in business, emotion is just seen as noise, like stop crying so we can figure out the logistics.
Exactly. But the WSSU views that emotion as a signal. It's literal data indicating that stability has been lost. So they use this incredibly deep listening to transform those anxious emotions into a bearable experience. They metabolize the anxiety for the group.
Metabolize the anxiety.
Yeah, they take the poison out of the air, process it through that heavy-duty EQ layer we just talked about, and they establish a stable floor so everyone else can stand back up again.
That is such a vivid image. It's really active work. But there's always but in these personality deep dives, this has to come with a cost.
It does.
We need to talk about the shadow blind spot. Because for the gentle receiver, the shadow is over-accommodation.
This is the danger zone for them. The core concept of their shadow is receive all weight first. And because they're so perfectly designed to bear weight, they often fail to realize when they're carrying too much until their knees just buckle.
Yeah, the report explicitly mentions a lack of boundaries. It seems like they can fall into this vicious cycle where just because they can handle the stress, people just keep giving it to them.
Constantly.
They become the path of least resistance for everybody else's drama.
And that leads directly to decision paralysis. They become so hyper-attuned to the stability of the group that they're terrified of making any decision that might burden someone else or cause a ripple. So they postpone necessary hard choices just to avoid disruption.
There's also a note here about a communication flaw that I found really insightful. Their gentle style can sometimes completely blur the core of a problem.
Oh, this happens all the time. They might wrap a piece of critical feedback in so much cotton wool, just trying to be kind, trying to make it safe, that the person on the receiving end doesn't even realize they're being corrected.
Right, like they walk away thinking they just got a compliment.
Exactly. The core message gets totally lost in the warmth. The WSSU internalizes the problem rather than confronting it head-on, which actually prevents true resolution.
So the guardian ends up protecting people from the truth, which ultimately hurts the very system they're trying to save.
Precisely. It's the grand paradox of their strength.
Let's pivot slightly to how this plays out in social relationships. The report calls them the gentle buffer, and I love the analogy of a shock absorber here.
It's the perfect mechanical comparison. Think of a car hitting a pothole. The shock absorber compresses, it takes that violent kinetic energy, and it desiccates it so the actual chassis of the car doesn't crack. In a friend group or a family, the gentle receiver is doing that constantly. They just reduce friction in the entire network.
And naturally, that makes them incredibly popular in a very deep sense. Like, people want to stay around them because they feel deeply understood and deeply accepted.
Yeah.
It's got to be addictive to be around someone who doesn't judge you, but just kind of holds you.
It is, but again, we have to look at the huge risk of overload. The report warns that they get labeled as the person who is always able to handle it. So, friends dump their trauma on them, family members dump their stress.
Right.
And because the WSSU's very nature is to receive, they do not have a natural eject button.
Yeah.
They can suffer in complete silence because, in their mind, complaining would disrupt the harmony.
Yeah. If you're listening right now and you identify as a WSSU, that is your giant red flag. You have to build in a release valve.
Definitely.
So, shifting gears to business value, I think there's this weird misconception that this type of energy is soft or just nice to have, but the ME80 report argues it's strategically critical.
Oh, it is absolutely critical for long-term stability. Look, organizations are often very cold, structural entities. They're just machines designed for output. The gentle receiver excels at injecting actual human warmth into those cold structures, which sounds nice on a greeting card, but is actually a massive retention strategy.
Right. They're the glue that keeps the top talent from walking out the door when things get hard.
And they're the coolant that keeps the engine from overheating. The report really highlights their value in crisis management. They are the cooling experts. When a project is on fire and everyone in the Slack channel is screaming, the WSSU is the one who steps in and quells the waves. They create psychological safety. And we already know that psychological safety is the #1 predictor of high-performing teams.
I also noticed the report credits them with accurately identifying system capacity limits during the planning phases. So while the visionary CEO is standing at the whiteboard saying, let's grow 300% in a month,
Right.
the WSSU is the one looking at the energy matrix and saying, guys, the system will literally break if we do that.
They establish the buffer mechanisms before the breakage even happens. They are your operational insurance policy.
So given all this, the ability to hold space, the risk perception, the stabilizing force, what are the recommended career fields for a gentle receiver? Because the Max Energy report actually lists a few specific ones.
Yeah, they list fields where that holding capacity is a primary asset, not a hindrance. First up is talent development. We're talking about education, corporate training, depth career counseling, and mentorship.
Okay, that makes total sense.
Right, these are roles where patience isn't just a virtue, it's literally a KPI. You need to be able to hold a student or a mentee through their messy learning curve.
Because they verify the growth based on experience, like we talked about earlier. What else is on the list?
Organizational support. Roles like HR business partners, employee relations, and culture building. Because they have that risk perception radar, they can sense when a company culture is turning toxic way before the quarterly engagement surveys come back. They intervene with warmth to fix the vibe early.
Now, the report also lists customer service, which surprised me at first, but it specifically says high-end customer maintenance and emotion management in crisis communication.
Yes, and this is a crucial distinction. We aren't talking about high-speed transactional call center support.
Right, not churning through tickets.
Exactly. We are talking about when a VIP client is absolutely furious. You don't send your aggressive closer to fix that relationship. You send the gentle receiver. They can absorb the client's anger, validate it, metabolize it, and actually turn that crisis into deep, long-term trust. They are bomb disposal experts for emotion.
Bomb disposal experts. I love that. And finally, the last one I recommend is operational assurance, roles focused on long-term stable operations.
Right. Care-focused management. Maintaining massive systems that need to run smoothly over years, not days. If you need someone to launch a scrappy startup in a week, go find a different profile. But if you need someone to ensure that company's still healthy and the culture's intact in 10 years, you need a WSSU.
It really just circles all the way back to that core philosophy, sustainability over speed.
It really does. And I think that's the ultimate aha moment for this entire profile. The world we live in right now, it praises speed. It praises the loud voices. It praises the breakers.
Ooh, fast and break things, right?
Exactly. But the immense value of the WSSU appears in stillness.
You know, it makes me think of a skyscraper. When you look at it, you admire the height, you admire the glass. You don't see the deep, heavy foundation underground that's holding all that weight, keeping the whole thing from swaying too much in the wind. The gentle receiver is that foundation.
That's exactly it. When a system isn't swaying, when a family manages to stay together through a tragedy, or when a startup team survives a brutal crunch period without everyone burning out and quitting, it's usually because there is a gentle receiver quietly holding that warmth, absorbing the shock, and allowing everything else to move forward.
So, I want to leave you guys with a thought to mull over today. Whether you see yourself in this WSSU profile, or maybe you're realizing you actually have one of these unsung heroes on your team, where in your life are you rushing to fix things, or rushing to speak, or forcing an outcome when you should just be holding them instead?
That is the real challenge, because sometimes the strongest, most active thing you can possibly do is to just stop, stand your ground, and hold the space for the people around you.
A huge thank you to the creators of the Max Energy ME80 Personality Assessment Report for this fascinating breakdown. I mean, it is rare to see a system that articulates the actual mechanics of stillness so clearly.
It's a remarkably deep system. If you want to understand your own energy matrix or figure out the people around you, you should really check them out.
You definitely should. You can visit their official website at www.maxenergylife.com, or if you want to find their community and really dig deeper into all this, search for Max Energy or Menent Energy on Facebook. There is so much more nuance to these profiles than we could ever cover in 20 minutes.
Highly recommended. It'll change how you see your team.
Thanks for taking this deep dive with us today. We'll see you on the next one.
Take care, everyone.